If you've ever stood at the edge of someone's passing and wondered where they went, you're not alone. The body becomes still, the breath vanishes, and yet something lingers. Maybe you've felt it. A presence in the room, a warmth, a whisper in the silence. It's as if the soul hasn't quite left, as if it's pausing, suspended between two worlds. And the question that haunts so many hearts is this: how long does a soul remain on earth after death? The answer isn't simple, but it is sacred. You see, when the physical body takes its final breath, the soul doesn't always immediately ascend. For some, the transition is instant, like a breath melting into sky. For others, it's a gentle unraveling, a journey that takes time, not by the clock, but by the rhythm of awareness, readiness, and release. Because the soul doesn't move by time, it moves by emotion, it moves by intention, it moves by love. When death first arrives, the soul often hovers, it watches, it listens, it tries to understand. Imagine being pulled from a dream, only to find that reality has changed completely. There's confusion, a soft fog. You may not even realize you've died. There are countless testimonies, souls who speak of drifting above their own bodies, watching the scene unfold as if it belonged to someone else. There's no fear, just curiosity, a stillness filled with questions. Why am I not being heard? Why can't I touch them anymore? Why is everyone crying? And it's in that pause, in that mystery, that the soul begins to remember. But not all souls let go right away. Many remain near the earth because something still ties them here. Not chains, not punishment, but threads, woven from emotion, memory, and connection. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that the thought of leaving them shattered you, then you understand why some souls choose to linger. Love is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, and it doesn't disappear with death. Quite the opposite, it can keep a soul nearby, watching over loved ones, protecting, trying to comfort them in grief. These are the souls you might feel around you in quiet moments, in dreams, in signs that arrive when you need them most. They haven't gone far, they've just shifted into a subtler presence, one that speaks not in words, but in knowing. But love isn't the only thread that keeps a soul tethered. There are also the unfinished stories, the regrets, the words left unsaid. Some souls leave their bodies with hearts full of apology, with burdens they couldn't release in life. They hover near those they hurt, or those they couldn't save, trying to make amends in energy even when they no longer can in voice. And sometimes they linger because they're afraid of judgment, afraid of the unknown, afraid of letting go, and so they stay, not trapped, but hesitant. You might wonder, how do they experience this lingering? It's not like walking through walls or floating above rooftops. It's more like being submerged in an emotional ocean, where thoughts become landscapes and feelings become forms. Some describe it as a dreamlike dimension, where the soul sees not just the outer world, but the ripple effect of every choice, every word, every act of kindness or cruelty. It's not punishment. It's illumination. In that space between worlds, the soul meets itself. Some experience peace immediately, a warmth that calls them upward. Others are met by guides, luminous beings who feel like family, even if they've never met in life. These guides don't command, they invite. They offer clarity, comfort, and reminders of what comes next. But whether a soul accepts that invitation depends entirely on one thing: readiness. And readiness is deeply personal. There are souls who need to watch their funeral, to see who comes, to witness how they are remembered. It's not vanity, it's closure. There are souls who visit every room they once called home, who walk through memories like hallways, feeling the echoes of laughter, of arguments, of first kisses and final goodbyes. They're not haunting, they're reflecting. And in some cases they're saying their own silent goodbyes. Then there are those who refuse to leave entirely, not because they're bad, Not because they're lost, but because they believe they must stay. Maybe they think their family can't survive without them. Maybe they're still trying to protect a child, a spouse, a friend. Maybe they died violently or suddenly and their spirit hasn't yet caught up to what's happened. If you've ever walked into a space and felt heavy emotion with no explanation, it could be this: a soul still hanging on, trying to finish what couldn't be finished in life. But here's something sacred. No soul is ever truly alone. Even in confusion, even in resistance, there are guides who wait patiently, who whisper gently, who shine quietly in the distance, like a lighthouse beyond the fog. They don't push, they don't judge, they simply hold the vibration of home until the soul is ready to return. And when that moment comes, when the soul surrenders, not in defeat, but in trust, it begins to rise, not upward, like smoke, but inward, into a light so familiar it feels like remembering a song you've always known. That light isn't a destination, it's a return, a merging, a reawakening to everything the soul always was but temporarily forgot. You might wonder, how long does that take? The truth is, in the realm of the soul, time doesn't tick, it stretches, it folds. What feels like minutes to you might feel like years to a soul, and what seems like decades from your view might be just a breath from theirs. The earth measures time by rotation, but the soul measures time by realization, and realization can take as long as it needs. This is why asking how long a soul remains on earth after death isn't just curiosity, it's a window into grief, into healing, and into the mystery of what it means to love someone beyond the veil. Because when you lose someone, part of you asks, are they still here? Do they know how much I miss them? Can they feel what I feel? And the answer is often yes. Because a soul doesn't vanish, it expands, it shifts, it awakens in a different octave of experience. But during that shift, it can still remain close, especially if the emotional ties were strong, or the transition abrupt, or the ending incomplete. There is a sacred interval after death, a liminal space, a threshold, one foot still echoing in the physical, the other stepping into the immaterial. And in this space the soul walks gently between worlds, not as a ghost, but as a presence, subtle, conscious, sensitive. It's here where love becomes both anchor and lifeline. Some souls linger out of devotion. They're not confused. They're caretaking. A father who promised to watch over his daughter, a grandmother whose prayer still hangs in the nursery. They stay not to haunt but to bless, to reassure, to uphold a promise whispered across lifetimes. But for others, the pause is less peaceful. It's wrapped in sorrow or guilt or disbelief. Maybe they didn't get to say goodbye. Maybe they lived in fear of death and now, faced with it, they can't accept what's happened. Maybe they're holding on to a grudge, a memory, a wound that feels unfinished. In this liminal state, the soul is not judged, it's met, lovingly, patiently, but it is also mirrored, meaning whatever emotional weight the soul carried in life doesn't disappear in an instant. It rises to the surface, and until it's acknowledged, until it's seen with honesty and love, it can delay the journey forward. Imagine a soul stepping out of the body like stepping out of clothing. At first there's disorientation. The body was familiar, it had limits. Now the soul is fluid, aware, unbound, but also uncertain, like waking up in a dream where everything looks the same, yet nothing responds the way it once did. Thoughts become immediate reality. Feelings shape surroundings. There are no lies here, only reflection. And if the soul left life with unfinished business, it will be invited, not forced, to face it now. But there's no shame in the pause. In fact, the space between death and transition is a gift. It offers healing that the physical world often didn't allow. Some souls spend what feels like a long time revisiting memories, not to be stuck in the past, but to fully understand it for the first time, to finally forgive. And that's why no two transitions are alike. Some souls pass swiftly, like a candle flame merging with the sun. Others take their time. They walk slowly, savoring the silence, making peace with the echoes of a life left behind. Some remain close to family for days, weeks, even years, waiting for the right moment to let go, not for themselves, but for the ones they love. Because the living hold on too. When grief becomes attachment, when mourning becomes guilt, when love becomes refusal to release, the soul may feel needed, and if it believes that letting go would cause harm, it may choose to stay. This is why healing on this side of the veil matters so deeply. When you heal your grief, you also free the soul. When you release with love, you give permission for flight. The soul doesn't cling out of ego, it clings because it remembers its purpose, and part of that purpose always is connection. So if you've ever wondered whether someone whose past is still near you, the answer lies in the nature of your bond. The deeper the love, the more likely the presence remains, for a time. Not to interfere, but to walk beside you, to make sure you're okay. To whisper through dreams, music, synchronicities, and sudden warmth that says, I'm still here. And when the soul finally begins to ascend, it doesn't leave in anger or absence. It rises in light, in truth, in knowing that the connection never depended on form. The goodbye was never the end. It was a turning of the page. You see, this question, how long a soul stays, is really a question about timing, but not Earth's timing, soul timing. And soul timing doesn't measure days or weeks, it measures transformation, readiness, willingness to release the known and embrace the infinite. So, while the physical body may fall still in a single moment, the soul's departure is much more poetic. It unfolds in layers, in realizations, in the gradual remembering of who and what it truly is. A being of light, a traveler between dimensions, an expression of divine love. Death is not a closed door, it's a passage, and the soul in its grace often pauses not because it's stuck, but because it's listening, watching, learning, waiting. Waiting for you to know you're not alone, that love has not ended, that what you shared transcends time and space. Waiting for you to heal enough to say, I'm okay, you can go now, I'll carry the light you left behind. And when you say those words, whether in tears or silence, the soul hears you, and something inside it releases. And in that release the journey continues, not away from you, but deeper into truth, closer to source, and from there, the soul still watches, still loves, still guides, just from the other side of the veil. There's a silence that comes with death, but it isn't the silence of absence. It's the silence of shifting, of crossing from density into subtlety, of stepping out of the body and into something so vast it feels both overwhelming and oddly familiar. In that first moment, the soul doesn't always know what has happened. There's no flashing sign that says, you've died. Instead, there's a soft unraveling, like waking up in a room you don't remember falling asleep in. You feel weightless, but not in a dreamlike way. More like someone has taken the heaviness of the world off your shoulders. The aches are gone, the pressure, the pain, the chronic thoughts, all of it melts, and in its place is presence, stillness, but also confusion. Where am I? Why does everything feel so quiet? Why can't they hear me? These are the first whispers of the in-between, and if you listen closely you'll hear stories from those who've been there. Stories of floating above hospital beds, of watching loved ones sob at a bedside, of calling out and not being heard. These aren't hallucinations, they are echoes of the soul realizing it has stepped beyond the veil. Take James, for example. He was 73 when he passed. Quietly, in his sleep, no pain, no struggle. Just one final exhale that carried him out like a tide slipping back into the sea. But James didn't realize it. He woke up the way he always did, early, before dawn. He sat at the edge of the bed, expecting to feel the familiar stiffness in his knees, the cold floor under his feet. But something was different. The room was quieter than usual. The light didn't seem quite right. It had a softness to it, a kind of glow that wasn't coming from any lamp. He stood up, confused, walked to the hallway, saw his wife in the kitchen, crying. His son had just arrived, eyes red, voice trembling. He tried to speak, nothing came out. He tried to touch her shoulder, his hand passed through. That's when the confusion started to give way to realization. Not a dramatic shock, not fear, just a slow unraveling understanding. Something had happened, and yet he didn't feel gone. He felt more alive than he had in years. That's the paradox. When the soul first steps out of the body, it often feels more real than it ever did while inside it. The senses don't dull, they heighten. Awareness expands. You can hear the emotions behind someone's words, feel the energy in a room like a current in the air. But the physical connection, that's what fades. You reach, but you don't make contact. You speak, but there's no reply. James stayed in the house for days. He watched as family came to visit. He saw the photo albums come out, the soft music playing, the laughter mixed with tears. And through it all, he tried to make sense of it. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't ready either. He felt in between. This is what some call the veil of confusion, a fog that gently covers the truth of death, not to trick the soul, but to ease it. Imagine if everything ended in a snap, all awareness cut off. That would be jarring. So instead the soul is given a grace period, a transition, a moment to observe, to understand, to process. And in that space time behaves strangely. What feels like a week to the living may feel like only minutes to the soul, or the opposite, one moment stretched across eternity, because in the space beyond time, experience becomes the measurement, not clocks. James watched the memorial. He heard the eulogies. He stood beside his wife as she whispered good night to his empty pillow, and part of him still didn't understand why she seemed so sad. After all, he was still there, standing right beside her. Wasn't he? That's another layer of the confusion. The soul doesn't feel dead, it feels awake, clear, present, so it takes time to realize that the connection has shifted, from physical to energetic, from seen to unseen. And for some souls, like James, the delay in understanding creates a lingering, not because of resistance, but because of love. Love holds us in place when logic can't. And here's the beautiful part. The soul is never left alone in that confusion. At first, it might seem like they're watching the world through glass. But over time, subtle presences begin to emerge. Beings of light, familiar figures, guides. They don't rush in, they wait. They appear when the soul begins to settle, when the heart starts to thin and the heart begins to open. But in that initial phase, the soul must walk alone for a while. Not as punishment, as grace, to observe, to reflect, to let the reality of what's happened bloom like a quiet truth. James eventually began to notice that the walls of the house didn't mean what they used to, that he could move without walking, that when he thought of his childhood he was suddenly there. Not in memory, but in presence. That realization marked the beginning of his awakening, the understanding that he was no longer bound by the rules of the physical. And with that awakening came choice. The choice to stay and watch a little longer, or the choice to turn toward the light he now sensed just beyond the edge of things. And that choice is always honored. No soul is forced to go anywhere, not yet, not until they're ready. The time between death and transition is a holy space, custom tailored to each soul. There's no rush, no deadline, just gentle unfolding. That's why the question of how long a soul remains is both simple and complex. The answer is as long as it needs to. For James, it was several weeks before he felt the invitation fully. before he saw the guide waiting near the threshold, before he felt the pull not away from his family but towards something deeper, something more loving than he'd ever known. Not an escape, a homecoming. And in that moment, as he finally turned toward the light, James whispered something. "Thank you. I understand now." And just like that, he was gone. Not lost, not erased, just returned. And from time to time, when his wife closes her eyes, when his son walks by a photo and smiles without knowing why, there's a warmth in the air. He's still there, just not in the way he used to be. Not every soul steps gently into the light. Some remain not because they're lost, but because they're still holding on to love, holding on to sorrow, holding on to stories they don't yet know how to end. Death, for all its finality, doesn't erase emotion, it magnifies it. And for many souls, the weight they carried in life becomes the very thing that keeps them close to earth. Love is one of the most powerful forces that binds a soul to the physical realm, not in a way that traps, but in a way that aches. When the connection to someone is so deep, so sacred, so woven into your very being, letting go can feel like betrayal. Especially when the death was unexpected, sudden, unexplained. For the soul, leaving behind someone who still needs them can feel unbearable. That's what happened to Margaret. She was a young mother, full of laughter, full of dreams, full of plans for the future. Her daughter, Lily, was just 9 months old when the accident happened. One moment she was running errands, the next she was standing in a strange space looking down at her crumpled car on the side of the road. People were shouting, sirens were screaming, but she felt none of it. She didn't understand. Her first thought wasn't about herself, it was about Lily. And before she could even name the fear, she was already there. Back at home, standing in the nursery watching her baby sleep. Her husband was still at work. The nanny had just put Lily down for her afternoon nap. Everything was normal. Everything was still. Except Margaret was gone. And yet, she wasn't. She tried to speak, tried to touch her child's cheek, tried to let someone, anyone, know she was there. But nothing she did made a sound. Nothing she did changed anything. And so she stayed. Not because she didn't know she had died. She figured that out within hours. No, she stayed because she couldn't imagine not staying. She was a mother, and mothers don't leave. Not willingly. Not even in death. You see, when the emotional bond is that strong, when the love is that consuming, the soul can create its own pause. A kind of energetic waiting room. Not punishment, not purgatory, just presence. The refusal to let go becomes its own choice. And the universe, it never rushes that choice. It waits with you. Margaret's soul lingered in the nursery. Every time Lily cried, she was there. Every time her husband sat in the dark holding a bottle, unsure how to move forward, she was beside him. She wasn't angry, she wasn't afraid. But she was overwhelmed by sorrow, by longing, by the weight of what would never be. And she wasn't alone. There are thousands, millions of souls like her, people whose lives ended with too much left unsaid, too many pages left unwritten. They remain near their homes, their families, their favorite parks, kitchens, and garden chairs. They remain tied, not by force, but by choice, by feeling. Some visit their old workplaces. Some linger by their most cherished possessions. An old piano, a favorite scarf, a letter hidden in a drawer that was never read. These aren't just objects. They're anchors, emotional imprints that keep a soul close. Because energy, real soul energy, lives in everything we love, and sometimes in everything we regret. It's not just love that holds a soul near, it's guilt, it's shame. It's the feeling that they did something they can't undo. Maybe they caused harm, maybe they abandoned someone, maybe they betrayed a truth too painful to face. And now, without the body to distract or defend, the soul is left to confront it. These aren't angry spirits, these are broken hearts. still trying to make amends from a place that no longer offers words or time. And the nature of the death, whether sudden or peaceful, can shape that experience. Peaceful passings often come with preparation. Time to say goodbye, time to reflect, time to begin the release. The soul may feel sorrow, but it also feels closure, a sense of being complete, ready. But sudden deaths, they're different. One moment you're mid-thought. The next, you're outside of yourself. There's no time for farewell, no time for last words. It's like being pulled from the stage before the final scene, still clutching the script. For these souls, the shock alone can cause them to linger. They may not even accept that they've died, or they may feel responsible for the pain their departure caused and stay behind to try and fix it, not because they must, but because they can't imagine not trying. And here's the deeper truth. Every emotional connection we form in life creates an energetic cord, a line of light, sometimes bright, sometimes tangled, that binds our energy to people, places, and moments. These cords don't disappear with death. They pulse, they hum, they call, and unless they're consciously released by both the soul and the living, those cords can keep a soul orbiting the earthly plane, not in torment, but in tenderness, a tenderness too deep to walk away from. Margaret's soul stayed near Lily for nearly 3 years. 3 years of nursery songs and sleepless nights, and watching from the corner of the room while her husband learned how to braid tiny curls. She couldn't touch them, couldn't speak to them, but she sent her love every day, hoping, just hoping, it reached them in some invisible way. And eventually, it did. It happened on a rainy afternoon. Lily was older, just shy of 4. She walked into the nursery and sat on the floor with an old stuffed bear. Margaret's bear, the one she slept with as a child and passed on to her daughter. Lily pressed her cheek to its head and said, "Thank you, Mama. I love you." Marguerite heard it, and in that instant the tether loosened. Not broken, just softened. The cord between them didn't dissolve. It changed. It no longer held her here. It now pointed her forward. That's the miracle. When love is no longer about staying, but about releasing. When grief becomes grace. When presence becomes blessing. And in that moment, Margaret turned toward the light. Not away from her daughter, but toward something greater than the nursery walls. Toward a love that held both of them in its embrace. Always. There comes a moment when the soul, no longer tethered by the body, begins to drift, not upward, not outward, but inward, into a realm that exists between the physical and the eternal. It's not a place you can find on any map. It doesn't sit in the clouds or orbit the earth. It exists beyond location. It exists within consciousness itself, and for many souls it's the next step after lingering. This is the intermediate realm. It's not heaven, it's not earth, it's something else entirely. A bridge, a mirror, a canvas made of feeling. Here the soul begins to shed the last illusions of material identity, but it doesn't happen all at once. Instead, what the soul experiences is a world shaped by its own emotions, thoughts, and memories. The surroundings are not fixed, they are fluid. Imagine waking up inside your own inner world, where your deepest joys and unspoken fears take shape as scenery, where your guilt becomes rain, your hope becomes sunlight, your longing a wind that pulls you toward a horizon you can't quite reach. This is not punishment, it's reflection, a sacred unfolding of all the truths you carried but didn't face. And every soul walks through this realm differently. Some see gardens, some see oceans, some walk through cities they once knew, except now they shimmer with energy. Nothing is static. Everything moves, shifts, responds. The terrain changes with every realization, every release, every breath of awareness. This space has been known in ancient traditions. The Tibetans called it the bardo, a liminal zone between death and rebirth. where the soul meets itself in full exposure. In other lineages, it is seen as a purgation chamber, not to cleanse sin, but to dissolve illusion. It's not meant to judge you, it's meant to reveal you. And this is where Sarah finds herself. She passed quietly, her final days spent surrounded by loved ones. There was peace in her parting, but also lingering pain. She had carried grief for decades, a loss she never fully spoke of. And when her soul slipped free of her body, it did so gently, no fear, just surrender. At first she stood in what looked like a hallway of light. Then it shifted. She blinked, and suddenly she was walking through a meadow. But not just any meadow. It was the one behind her childhood home, the one where she used to run with bare feet, laughing under the open sky. It felt like home, the grass swayed, the air glowed, but as she walked she noticed something unusual. The colors would change, the wind would still, the light would flicker, and it always seemed to match her feelings. When joy rose in her chest, the sky turned gold, radiant and warm. When sorrow surfaced, clouds rolled in, gentle, not frightening, but heavy with memory. And when fear crept in, shadows appeared at the edges of the trees, not monsters, not demons, just silhouettes. Feelings she had buried, faces of those she had lost. Echoes of guilt that had never been spoken aloud. She realized quickly this wasn't a place outside of her, it was inside, a living map of everything she hadn't finished feeling. And in that moment she understood something profound. She was not being judged. She was being invited to walk through herself. Because in this realm, healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from facing, from witnessing what you've hidden from sitting beside the emotions you spent a lifetime avoiding. Not to suffer, but to integrate. That's what makes this realm so powerful. It gives the soul a safe container to feel what it couldn't feel before, to see what it couldn't see. And the more you feel, the more the scenery changes. Shadows become teachers. Light becomes memory. Pain becomes understanding. There are no clocks here, no walls, no endings, just unfolding. Some souls walk this realm for what seems like days, others for years. Not because they're stuck, but because they're healing at the speed of willingness. Time doesn't move here. Realization does. Sarah's meadow eventually became something else. A mountain path, then a temple, then a river, that whispered truths to her in voices she recognized as her own. Each transformation came with a letting go, each scene a revelation, and through it all she never felt alone. There were guides in the distance, shapes made of light. They never interrupted. They waited, watched, held space. That's the beauty of the in-between. It holds you, but never holds you back. It's a cocoon that doesn't close. It breathes with you. It bends to your readiness. And yes, it can be intense. Not every soul sees light and flowers. Some find themselves in darkened spaces at first, cities full of noise, rooms full of echoes. But even these are not punishments. They are reflections of chaos that was never soothed, of wounds that were never seen. And once the soul begins to understand that what it sees is what it brings, everything begins to soften. In this realm, clarity is the medicine. The soul begins to recognize, I am the light I seek, I am the storm I feared, I am the one I waited for. And once that realization begins to bloom, the realm starts to dissolve. The walls of imagery fall away, the symbols melt, the space clears, and what rises on the horizon is not a sun, but a radiance, a beckoning, a truth. It is the call of the next realm. But the soul cannot rush to it. It cannot bypass the in-between. To move forward, the soul must remember, must reclaim, must become whole. And so this sacred space, this bardo, this mirror, becomes the soul's greatest ally. Because here, at last, You are seen by the only one who truly matters, yourself. Not every journey through the in-between is walked alone. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when the soul begins to sense a presence, not from the outside, but from somewhere deep within, a light, a pull, a vibration that feels like home and eternity all at once. This is when the guides arrive. They do not appear suddenly with fanfare. There is no grand announcement, no burst of celestial thunder. Instead, they show up with a familiarity that softens fear. You may not recognize their face immediately, but something in you remembers them. Not from this life, perhaps, but from before. Or maybe from what lies beyond. Some appear as ancestors. A grandmother whose hands once held yours, a father who passed when you were young. Others may appear as beings of light, forms so radiant they almost can't be looked at, and yet their gaze fills you with a peace you didn't know you were missing. And sometimes they take on the image of someone you once loved deeply, even if only for a moment in time. Their role isn't to impress, it's to orient, to remind you. Because in this realm, memory is medicine. These guides are not here to judge, they're not keeping score. They are facilitators of truth, gentle midwives of the soul. And they come with one purpose, to help you remember who you truly are, beyond your pain, your roles, your regrets. But here's the thing, your openness determines how clearly you can see them. Some souls embrace these guides immediately. They feel the vibration of love and walk toward it. But others resist. Not because they are bad or unwilling, but because they're afraid. Maybe they were taught to fear judgment. Maybe they carried shame too long. Maybe they don't believe they're worthy of peace. And so even in death, they hide. But the guides, they never leave. They wait. Patiently, lovingly, holding the space just outside the soul's awareness, whispering through symbols, dreams, flickers of memory. They don't force themselves forward. They respect free will even here, and eventually when the soul is ready, when the fear thins just enough, one of them steps forward. That's what happened to Henry. Henry had lived a hard life. He was angry for most of it, quick-tempered, quietly bitter. He never talked about his childhood, not even to his closest friends. There was a heaviness in his eyes that few ever questioned. When he passed, it wasn't sudden. His body had been sick for years, but his soul, it wasn't ready. When he found himself in the in-between, he didn't go wandering through peaceful gardens. He sat still, eyes closed, arms crossed. The space around him was grey, undefined, like fog wrapped around silence. He didn't want to see anything. He didn't want to feel anything, not yet. And then there was a voice, soft, low, warm, the kind of voice that feels like it remembers you even when you've forgotten yourself. Henry. He didn't look up at first. He thought it was just memory playing tricks, but then he heard it again. Henry, it's time. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw a man standing before him, tall, rugged, wearing the same hat his grandfather used to wear in the garden. It was impossible he hadn't thought of that man in decades, but there he was, calm, glowing faintly, eyes full of something deeper than words. Henry stood slowly. He didn't speak. The figure smiled, not with his mouth, but with his presence. I've been waiting. Henry's jaw clenched. Why? Because you've been holding too much, the guide said. It's time to let it go. And then, in that moment, without any demand or drama, Henry began to feel everything he had buried. The anger toward his father, the silence of his mother, the shame he felt when he couldn't protect his little brother from what happened behind closed doors. It all came back, not to wound him, but to be released. Tears fell, not because of pain, but because of recognition. The guide stepped closer, laid a hand on his shoulder, not physical, but deeply felt. You carried their mistakes as your burden. But it was never yours. You can let it fall now. And in that moment Henry collapsed, not in agony, but in surrender. The space around him changed. The fog lifted, warmth rushed in, and suddenly he was no longer alone. More guides appeared, shapes in the periphery, beings who had always been with him, silently holding space, waiting for this moment. This is how it often happened. The soul cannot be forced to heal, it must be invited, and the invitation comes not with commands but with compassion. The guides carry the frequency of truth, not as information but as vibration. When you stand in their presence, your pain begins to melt, not because they erase it, but because they help you remember who you were before the pain took hold. And that memory is liberation. Some souls meet guides who simply walk beside them in silence. Others engage in long, winding conversations about love, purpose, mistakes, and miracles. The guides will show you scenes not as judgment, but as mirrors. Moments from your life where you hurt someone, moments where you healed someone. You will feel what they felt. You will understand the ripple of every choice. But even then, you are not condemned. You are shown, so that you can grow, so that you can forgive. Because forgiveness is not just for the living, it is for the soul. And the soul, once it forgives itself, begins to glow. You can see it if you've ever been near someone who has passed with peace in their heart. There's a softness that lingers, a warmth that doesn't fade. That's what happens when the guides are received. They walk with you until you no longer need them to walk in front, until you realize you are one of them. You always were. You simply forgot. And so the presence of these beings, these luminous companions, is not proof of some external hierarchy. It is a reflection of your own inner truth. They are fragments of the divine, just like you, here to welcome you back into the remembrance of your own light. And when you are ready, they walk with you toward it, not away from life, but deeper into love. There's a sacred unfolding that begins once the soul starts to remember. It doesn't just reflect on its own feelings, it begins to feel the impact it had on others, not just in isolated moments, but in a wider web of cause and effect that stretches far beyond the physical lifetime. This isn't about judgment, it's about integration, about witnessing the ripples we left in the world, the ones we meant to create and the ones we didn't even know we made. When a soul lingers near Earth, it's often because something remains to be seen. Not in the literal sense, but in the energetic sense. You start to realize that your words didn't stop when you said them. Your actions didn't end when you walked away. They echoed, they rippled. They left fingerprints on the hearts of others. And those fingerprints, they become part of the soul's curriculum. This isn't about ego, it's not about taking pride or wallowing in guilt. It's about clarity. A soul remains nearby not because it needs praise or punishment, but because it is watching the garden it helped plant, whether that garden bloomed with love or pain, and sometimes both. Henry knew this feeling intimately. After meeting his guide and beginning to release the weight he'd carried for decades, he was shown something, not as a punishment, not as a movie reel of guilt, but as an invitation to understand. He saw his son. Not in the hospital where he had last seen him, but years earlier. Henry watched himself sitting at the kitchen table, slamming his fist in frustration as his son spilled juice on an envelope that had been marked urgent. Henry's voice raised, his eyes burned, his words sharp and slicing. "Why do you always ruin everything?" And then he saw the aftermath. Not just the tears that fell that day, but the way his son began to shrink, began to tiptoe through life, always trying not to disappoint, the hesitations in his voice, the avoidance of risks, the echo of his father's anger shaping the way he approached the world. Henry wept, not because he was being punished, but because he finally understood. The ripple had outlived the moment, and now he could feel it. But then something else was shown. Another scene. This time Henry was younger, in his 20s, working in a mechanic's shop. A teenage boy had wandered in, clearly hungry, clearly desperate. Most would have turned him away, but Henry had handed him a sandwich, waved off the payment, and quietly fixed the flat tire on his rusted bike without a word. That boy never forgot. In the vision, Henry saw him years later, well-dressed, confident, speaking to a group of kids about the importance of second chances. He referenced a stranger who once showed him unexpected kindness, said it reminded him that people could be good even when they didn't have to be. Henry had no memory of that moment, but it lived on. It mattered. And that's what the soul learns in this stage of the journey. You don't always know what parts of you live on in others. The smile you gave a stranger at the bus stop, the cruel words said in passing, the story you shared that helped someone heal, the betrayal that taught someone to protect themselves. These moments don't vanish. They continue, like ripples in a pond long after the stone has sunk. And when the soul becomes aware of these ripples, something shifts. A deeper compassion is born, not just for others, but for yourself. You begin to see how complex the human journey truly is, how your wounds led to your mistakes, how your kindness came from your own longing to be loved. It doesn't excuse everything, but it explains it, and explanation opens the door to healing. Sometimes these ripple realizations keep the soul near earth for a while longer, not because they're stuck, but because the learning is still unfolding. The soul wants to understand, to witness the web of cause and effect. And as it does, it begins to evolve, not by forgetting, but by embracing. And that evolution, it's why some spirits visit the living, not to haunt, but to observe, to learn, to say, I see you now. I didn't before, but I do now. Some do this silently. Others come through dreams, symbols, synchronicities, but all carry the same purpose, integration. Because when you fully see what your life created, you begin to reclaim the power to shape what comes next. For Henry, these revelations changed everything. He no longer viewed his life as a chain of mistakes. He saw it as a field of experiences, some painful, some luminous, but all contributing to the soul he had become. And that realization brought peace, not just to him, but to those he had impacted. Because the moment a soul evolves, it sends out a new ripple, one of healing, one that reaches backward and forward through time. This is how legacies are rewritten, not just by apologies, but by energy, by intention, by growth. And eventually, Henry felt something shift again. He wasn't just observing anymore, he was radiating. The sadness had softened into wisdom. The regret had become empathy. The echoes of his past no longer bound him. They guided him, and he understood that while he could not go back and change what had been done, he could carry forward a different frequency, one that could ripple through the unseen world in ways his actions never could. That is the soul's true power, to effect change not just in matter but in meaning, to become a presence that brings peace, not by erasing what was, but by transmuting it. And when that happens, the soul is no longer tethered, not because it is finished, but because it is free. Even in the afterlife, free will remains intact. Death doesn't erase choice, it expands it. The soul is never forced into the light, it isn't pushed, pulled, or punished, it is always invited. And some simply refuse the invitation, not because they are evil, because they are afraid. There are souls who do not move forward after death. Not yet. They remain close to the earthly plane, not as protectors or quiet observers, but as lingering energies tangled in fear, pain, or disbelief. Some refuse to accept that they've died. Others are so consumed by anger or sorrow that the very thought of release feels like betrayal. And still others, those who carry deep shame or a desire for vengeance, cling tightly to the only world they know. These are the spirits we often misunderstand. When people speak of hauntings, they imagine something sinister, restless ghosts who seek to harm. But more often than not, what they are sensing are emotional imprints. energetic echoes left behind by souls who are stuck not in place, but in perception. A soul that refuses to ascend is not trapped by some cosmic punishment. It's trapped in a loop of its own making, a loop born of denial, grief, rage, or confusion, and until it sees the truth it's avoiding, it cannot move beyond the threshold of its own story. Some remain near the place where they died, reliving the moment over and over, not because they want to, but because it's the last thing they remember. A traumatic death can leave the soul in shock, looping through the final sensations, unable to orient itself, like waking from a nightmare, only to find you're still inside it. Others stay behind with a mission in mind: revenge, justice, closure. They feel wronged by the world, by someone they loved, by life itself. And so they stay, trying to fix what cannot be fixed from that realm. They whisper, they bang, they send chills through rooms, not to scare, to be seen, to be acknowledged. Then there are those who linger because of despair. They believe they don't deserve to move on. Maybe they lived with regret. Maybe they hurt others and never forgave themselves. In life, they avoided mirrors. In death, they avoid the light because they believe the light will expose them, or worse, reject them. But it never does. There is no place the light refuses to shine, no soul so broken that it cannot be loved. The only barrier is belief, and that belief holds them in place. You might have felt one before: a chill in a hallway, a heaviness in a room, an object that moves without explanation. These moments are not to be feared. They are calls, quiet cries from a soul waiting to be seen. Because what heals a lingering soul isn't ritual or fear. It's love. It's prayer. It's forgiveness. A whispered, "You are free now," carries more power than any chant. A heartfelt blessing, "I forgive you," can break through decades of darkness. When the living let go, when they bless instead of fear, the veil begins to part, and the soul, once afraid, begins to remember the truth, that it was never alone, that it was never condemned. Because a soul that won't ascend isn't stuck. It's waiting for a truth it still denies, and that truth is always the same: you are loved, you are worthy, you are free to go. There's a tenderness in understanding this. Imagine living your whole life thinking you're unlovable. Then, in death, you're shown a light so radiant it feels impossible. You doubt it, you turn away, not because you hate it, but because you believe you don't belong in it. So you stay in the shadows. But even then the light waits. It never closes, it never fades. It simply holds its arms open again and again. And it's not just the soul who must come to terms. Sometimes the living must too. Some spirits won't leave because someone is holding onto them too tightly. A grieving partner who begs for one more sign. A child who refuses to say goodbye. That bond, while beautiful, can become a rope, a tie that keeps the soul orbiting the earthly plane, unsure if it's safe to let go. And so healing must happen on both sides of the veil. That's why prayer matters, not as a demand, but as a bridge. When you speak to a lost loved one with peace in your heart, when you bless them with your words instead of anchoring them with your pain, you help open the door. You might say, "Thank you for loving me. I release you now, go in peace." Those words, spoken in sincerity, are more powerful than you realize. They don't just offer comfort, they offer freedom, because when you let go in love, you call them home. And eventually even the most stubborn souls come to that threshold again. Maybe it takes months, maybe decades, but no one is lost forever. Every soul, no matter how dark its past, has a path back to light. It may come in a dream, in a memory, in a sudden moment of surrender, and when it does, the shadows lift, the noise fades, and the soul, no longer afraid, finally turns toward the light it thought it didn't deserve, and steps into the truth it had always forgotten, that love is stronger than fear, that forgiveness is greater than guilt, that no one is ever truly alone, not in life, not in death, not even in the moments in between. The soul's journey beyond death is never walked in isolation. Even when it seems alone, it is connected, deeply, mysteriously, eternally, to those who remain behind. The bond between the living and the departed doesn't end with a final breath. In many ways, it only deepens. And here's what many people don't realize. You can help a soul transition. You, yes, you can be the light at the edge of someone's in-between, not by forcing, not by preaching, but by loving, by remembering, by releasing. The power of intention is vast, and when that intention is offered with love, it creates a pathway, a bridge, for souls still hovering near the earthly plane. Prayer is one of the oldest ways this bridge has been formed. Not the formal, memorized kind, but the personal kind, the whisper in the dark, the conversation in the heart. When you speak to the dead, not in fear, not in desperation, but in reverence, you become a lantern in their twilight. And they hear you, they feel you. Because in the world beyond, words are energy, and energy travels instantly. There is nothing taboo about speaking to those who've passed. It is sacred. Across cultures and traditions, people have gathered around fire, river, altar, and silence to call forth their ancestors, not to summon them for entertainment, but to honor them, to acknowledge the unfinished stories, to say, "You are remembered." And in that remembrance, something extraordinary happens. The soul begins to move. Ceremony matters, not because of the ritual itself, but because of the intention behind it. A candle lit in memory, a favorite song played with love, a letter written and burned beneath the moon. These small acts carry massive spiritual weight. They let the soul know, you are seen, you are forgiven, you are released. And sometimes it's not just about them, it's about you. When you release your grief, when you unclench your heart and let go of the longing, you unhook the cords that may be binding both of you in sorrow. And in that release, a soul can rise, not away from you, but deeper into peace. There are people among us who feel this more than others. People who don't just grieve but sense. Who dream of the dead, who feel cold air when no window is open. Who sense a presence in the corner of the room and somehow know someone is trying to say goodbye. These people are known by many names. In some traditions they're called gatekeepers, others call them soul ushers, transitional empaths. These are the ones who can walk both worlds without fear. They often don't even realize who they are. They just know they've always felt too much. But that too much is actually a gift. It's a signal, a calling. Because some souls need help crossing, not because they can't find the light, but because they need someone to remind them they're worthy of it. And sometimes that someone is a daughter. Margaret's daughter Lily grew up with a presence she couldn't name. She always felt her mother near, in the shadows of her bedroom, in the songs she would hum without knowing where they came from, in the warmth that settled over her when she cried. She never doubted her mother had loved her, but she did carry anger. Anger at a world that took her too soon. Anger at not remembering her face. Anger at the aching hole left in every photo, every birthday, every milestone. And for a long time that anger created a wall, not just in her heart, but in the space between worlds. Margaret's soul had remained, weeping at the crib, watching her daughter grow, wanting to help but unable to pass through, because the tether wasn't just her longing, it was her daughter's pain. Lily grew into a woman with a deep intuition. She didn't call herself spiritual, but she had dreams she couldn't explain, feelings she couldn't deny. And then, one night, on the eve of her 30th birthday, she found an old letter. It had been tucked into a box of baby clothes. A letter from her mother, written before her birth. Simple words, full of hope. "I can't wait to meet you. You are already the best thing I've ever done." Lily sat on the floor and cried. not just for the mother she lost, but for the love she now remembered. And something cracked open. That night she lit a candle, not out of ritual, just instinct. She held the letter to her chest and spoke out loud, "I forgive you for leaving. I forgive the world for taking you. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, you can go now. I'm okay." The room shifted, the air warmed. A breeze moved through the curtains, though the windows were shut, and in a place beyond time Margaret's soul exhaled. Not in sadness, in relief. The moment her daughter forgave her, the weight she'd been carrying began to dissolve. Not because she was being let go, but because she was being seen, fully, finally, and with that, Margaret began to ascend. Not as a ghost released, but as a mother fulfilled. She left, not because she was gone, but because she was home. And Lily? She would never stop missing her, but the ache had changed. It had softened into gratitude, into grace. That's the power of release. That's what your love can do. You don't need rituals carved in stone. You don't need temples or titles. You just need truth. You are free. Go in peace. I'll carry your light forward. And when you say those words, quietly or aloud, the veil thins, and somewhere a soul begins its journey home. The question echoes, how long does a soul remain on earth after death? And the answer is this: it depends. There is no rule, no single timeline etched in the stars, no celestial stopwatch that begins ticking the moment a heart stops beating. Every soul's departure unfolds with exquisite precision, not according to man-made measurements, but according to divine readiness. And readiness is never rushed. It's not about how much time has passed. It's about how much truth has been felt. Some souls ascend in what feels like an instant. The moment their body falls still, they rise. Free, light, complete. There is no lingering, no confusion, just a return, like the tide flowing back to sea. For them, the work was done, the lessons integrated, the heart at peace. But for others, the path is slower, not because they are less evolved, but because their journey is different. Their soul chose an experience that requires time, grace, integration. And in that time, they are not lost, they are unfolding. You see, divine intelligence orchestrates every moment of the soul's movement, before birth, during life, and long after death. There are no mistakes, no forgotten souls, no abandoned spirits. What seems like delay to us is often divine alignment in motion. The soul may stay near earth for days, weeks, even years, not because something is broken, but because something is healing, learning, loving, becoming whole again. We tend to fear delay. We think if they haven't moved on, something must be wrong. But it's not about wrong or right. It's about resonance. The soul must be ready to match the vibration of where it's going, and that readiness is shaped by emotion, memory, love, and the willingness to surrender. Love is both the tether and the key. It binds us across time, across death, across dimensions. But it is also the great releaser. When love matures, it doesn't cling, it blesses. It doesn't trap, it sets free. The soul transitions not when it's told to, but when it chooses to. When the weight of fear is finally laid down, when the echo of a final goodbye has been spoken, when forgiveness wraps around old regret like a blanket and says, "It's okay now. You're allowed to go." There is no higher being forcing a soul through gates. There is only invitation, a calling, a light that never fades, patiently waiting until the soul is ready to turn toward it with open eyes. And even then, even as it begins to rise, the soul doesn't disappear. It simply shifts form. Presence becomes essence. Essence becomes guidance. Guidance becomes whispers in the wind, warmth in the sunlight, signs that arrive just when you need them most. Because no matter how long a soul lingers, or how quickly it ascends, you are never truly without them. Nor are you ever truly alone. Not in life, not in death, not in the liminal space in between. That is the sacred mystery of soul timing. It teaches us patience, compassion, humility. It reminds us that the universe does not run on clocks, it runs on consciousness. And consciousness moves at the pace of love. If you're grieving someone and still feel their presence, it doesn't mean they're trapped, it may mean they're blessing you, saying goodbye in their own time, waiting for the right moment to rise, or maybe they already have, and what you feel is their peace echoing backward, touching your heart like a feather on still water. And if you've ever wondered about your own time, what it will feel like, how it will unfold, know this: you will not walk that path alone. Just as you were guided into this world, you will be guided out. You will be met, you will be seen, you will be known in a way more complete and gentle than anything this world could offer. There will be no rush, only welcome, only light. Only a love so familiar, you'll wonder how you ever forgot it. And when your time comes, you'll understand death does not close the story, it turns the page. The soul continues, the journey deepens, and love, always, always love, remains.